Welcome. The show about
two
two
honkies
honkies feeling bad about
being white males.
white males.
This episode is about Stalker, the
Yes.
great Andrei Tarkovsky movie that came out in the Criterion Collection finally 2017 and was selling off the shelves too fast for
Was it?
because I hate ordering things online. I think I had to order it online because all the stores they sold out really fast, because it's crazy. It's like a bigger cult movie than you'd think for a Russian movie, because Solaris kind of was his most famous movie
Internationally.
Yeah, but now Stalker kind of has eclipsed.
You think it's picked up more of a following among film people, and it was one of those movies everybody wanted in the Criterion Collection for so long.
Yeah, and philosophers and stuff, and and it's cool that it finally got remastered and distributed better.
Absolutely.
I guess we'll start with Greg. What are your overall thoughts of the movie, and basically what you liked and didn't like about it? Because I know you're gonna want to go off on what you don't like about it, which is what you usually do. I'm just kidding.
No, not when there's nothing to dislike. If I'm talking about a movie that's shitty, then yeah. If we were talking about American Hustle, I'd be like, here's what I think. But because we're talking about Stalker, an acclaimed movie by Andrei Tarkovsky, I have lots of positive things to say.
Yeah, Greg's referring to the fight we had before the podcast.
Was it really a fight?
He just started talking about American Hustle. And so, but no, yeah, and then basically your overall takeaway of the movie, cliche person might say, oh, what's the lesson you learned? I don't know, whatever.
Well, it's not really fair to say what's your overall takeaway from a film so complex. So
yeah,
shame on you, first of all. But if I had to, not to summarize it, but if I had to give a takeaway, it's a movie that's really deliberately paced in a way that I think seems almost irritating at first, definitely jarring to modern viewers. But I think as you get into it, I think it's a movie where you kind of adapt to the rhythm of it. And I think it works in a way that some of the ideas, some of the long shots, the really lengthy scenes are done in a way that it encourages your mind to kind of wander, but in a way that's actually to the film's credit. Because so much of it is about, there's three guys going into the zone, which is where the stalker is taking them. And they each kind of have their own motivations for what lies there. And because it frames it like a big, philosophical question about what people perceive when they get to the zone, how everybody's desires kind of become physical, I think it's a big enough question. And then the scenes themselves are drawn out long enough where it has the audience kind of actively thinking about where this is going, even in the periods where they're maybe irritated about how long some of the scenes are taking.
Right, because I think it's reflective of the impatience that the writer and the professor and the stalker have, even having to travel there. And then it's funny because I was thinking because you kind of think of reality in terms of wait, they don't seem like they have a lot of food on them.
Right.
How are they gonna live now? How long are they gonna be there? And then you realize, they say something to the effect later, I realize, oh, it's like a day trip. They want to get home before dinner kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's a short thing, and you almost don't realize that, because the weight that the whole trip has is so heavy, even when they're going into the zone. And it's funny because it's paced almost for a small section of the movie. So much of it is contemplative. But the moment where they're going into the zone, it's kind of briefly paced more like a traditional like sci-fi thriller or something like that, where there is a little tension with them having to get on the trolley cart and then evade, I guess they're government officials who are guarding the zone. It's never really set up who that is. So for a minute, you have something that's moving pretty quickly and is more like a conventional film, and you think they have a larger journey ahead, but then you find out no, they're just going for this set amount of time. But the weight of everything surrounding it, you almost realize that after the fact. You're like, oh, they're just there for an afternoon? That's not what this made me feel.
Yeah, and I think that's because of what I've read basically about Tarkovsky and his technique is he believes in like because like his one of his, I think his memoir or biography was called Sculpting in Time. So and that basically with the philosophy that longer shots are more truthful,
right?
Than cutting up a bunch of, like most movies, it's basically more like more manipulative to cut up a movie a lot with tons of shots, like a lot of filmmakers.
Right.
I also think that also has its strengths in terms of storytelling as well, but
yeah, oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's also in this movie there's 142 shots in
which is actually pretty small for being a 3-hour film.
Yeah, no, that's like unheard of small.
Yeah.
Because all the shots are on average over a minute, and some shots are like 3 or 4 minutes.
88 seconds, I think, is the average, we said.
Okay, read that this was like about a minute and a half, right? And basically he believes that because it's just more truthful when you let a shot go. People don't feel like they're like being manipulated like a regular movie.
They don't feel like they're watching a movie. You don't think about how you're watching a movie as much.
Yeah, you're kind of just peering into a window of another, which basically what any video, movie, film is basically, it's the simple version of basically staring into another dimension of time and space, which is kind of crazy to think about in terms of the invention of photography is kind of the invention of the first forms that man can experience dimension of time and space, and so with recording, you're recording the time capsule of that time and space.
I'm pretty sure Andrei, the French critic who was like one of the first film critics, said something about that, how edits are basically lies, and that film itself was like a dream, and that when you edit it kind of like breaks that up. I'm probably bastardizing that a whole bunch because he's a very serious film writer, but I remember that from school.
Well, I think bastardizing things is better than just us reading something or plagiarizing, or not plagiarizing, but just like reading something, crediting them. But also bastardizing it is more, will communicate it more to our shitty generation.
Okay, sure. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Like, I sound stupid reiterating it, but in the end, it's for everyone's benefit because everyone else is also stupid, and this is the only way we're all going to understand. All right, cool.
Actually, that makes me think of another point I wanted to make about, like, criticism, where, like, because a lot of people will say, like, a slow movie is, like, pretentious, right? But I think that a lot of people use the word pretentious to criticize something are, first of all, kind of being pretentious themselves by using the word pretentious.
Yeah, it's a pretty shitty word to use when criticizing any form of artwork, because I feel like it is
kind of a broad word that just means like, oh, you're showing off, or you're maybe talking about something you don't know anything about, or like,
yeah, one of the best description I actually heard of pretentious actually came from a film message board, which is usually where you don't learn anything about film. So right. It was weird that something positive happened. But obviously pretentious is used to be thrown around a lot on IMDb's film message boards, but they got rid of the boards, so you can't see that anymore. But pretentious was always the word.
Get rid of the boards. I didn't know that.
They're completely gone because nothing. I mean, it just goes to show how this much communication actually isn't helpful. Because there was a board for every single movie in IMDb, like every single actor, and IMDb decided to get rid of all of them.
Write on them, but very rarely.
I wrote on them pretty often, and people decided it was pointless
because nothing gets done.
Yeah, nothing gets accomplished. I met two cool people who I'm like still in contact with over the internet, but we've never met in person. But it was from the IMDb boards, and mostly everybody was fucking insane.
Yeah, that's where crazy people go to vent, and I kind of saw some helpful things or links, because like
I think there definitely can be, because people, were able like to make like profiles back then and make it their own and make like their list of favorite movies. I think it was very good for like discovering new stuff. But if I had to actually like ratio all the conversations I've had, I'd say most of it was a waste of time, and like a handful of it was actually pretty helpful.
I put on there, I asked Thelma Schoonmaker, Scorsese's editor, that I just asked her like what movies were coming up that they were remastering, and she said something about that the Pumpernickel movie that Michael Powell made, and
Pimpernel?
The what?
The Pimpernel or Pumpernickel?
Yeah, some movie that had Pumpernickel or Pumpernickel in it.
Wait, you asked her on the IMDb message board?
No, I asked her in person. Yeah, sorry. I asked her in person at Film Forum when I got her autograph.
What does that have to do with anything we were talking about?
Just really quick.
Okay, let's hear it.
It has to do with the message board. I put on the message board this information that I got from her in person.
And people were like, no?
The Pumpernickel movie was like the next to be remastered or whatever. But I looked up, like when I put that on there like 7 years ago or something, and that movie has yet to be released. So even though I was trying to be helpful in actually giving real...
Oh, so you're actually using yourself as an example of how not helpful message boards are.
Right, because even though I
got information straight from the source, and I still basically...
But it still doesn't mean anything. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. It's like people just have to like, I don't know, communicate old school or something, I don't know. Or just like use the technology we have, but still respect it and not just go crazy like we do as humans. But anyway, another podcast. Basically, my point was that like, and Jeff Dyer, who wrote a book on Stalker called Zona, he was basically saying that that's another thing Tarkovsky, one of the frictions he had with the studio was that they thought it was too slow. Of course, they're going to say,
of course.
Money people are going to say it's too slow. And he said, well, good. Like, then the idiots who don't want to be there should leave then.
Is that specifically what he said?
It's kind of like his screening process as a pretentious filmmaker. Just like make it slow so that the idiots I don't want in there, they leave anyway. And it's kind of like a screening process for him, which I thought was kind of ingenious.
His response should have been like, well, this is the fucking world we're living in. What do you think? Like, it's a depiction of, the mindset that we're all in from living under this fucking awful system of government for this long. This is how we see reality. It's slow and it's industrial and it's covered in dirt. And we're just looking for something to have faith in. What do you think, you fucking assholes? That's what I would have said.
Yeah, which is kind of his response to 2001: A Space Odyssey with Solaris.
Did he dislike 2001?
No, I'm saying his response to 2001 was Solaris in terms of, I want my spaceship to be like a broken down bus.
Yeah, but I've heard that 2001: Space Odyssey was actually a more accurate depiction of space travel, even though Tarkovsky was going for like a more like blue collar look. Right,
and that was his like basically that was his version of reality, or bringing reality to that.
So I do prefer Solaris over 2001, but I like both of them a lot.
Yeah, 2001: A Space Odyssey is kind of what made me realize movies can be art, and what brought me into art cinema rather than just like commercial movies where I didn't know what I was missing until I saw that movie. But anyway,
Let's bring it back to Stalker, because
yeah. No, I
if
mean,
someone, if here's a good question, if
yeah,
someone was to criticize Stalker of being pretentious, which to define the term is, I heard someone on the message board, which is how we started this whole conversation, say being pretentious is basically kind of the same thing as being hypocritical, because it talks about like it's something that postures itself as dealing with a specific issue but doesn't actually delve into it. And the example he used at the time was what the hell is it? A Beautiful Mind, the Ron Howard movie.
yeah,
That kind of ignores like the real horrors of schizophrenia and doesn't really say anything. I haven't seen it in a long time, so that might be a shitty thing to say, but that sounds right. So if some dude was like, Stalker is pretentious, I don't think it's all bullshit, what would you say?
Well, first of all, you have to give the reason why. You can't just say that. Like,
Okay, what if they're just like, oh, it's, we never see the room. It doesn't touch on it effectively because we should have been able to see the room and saw all their desires. And I'm just pissed off now because this guy obviously just wants to show dirt and garbage in the water and these guys taking naps. I'm pissed off.
well, actually, the camera does go back far enough where you kind of do see the room is just that watery space with like water coming down on it.
Is it?
Yeah, it does pull back far enough to where you kind of do see, well, at least what is the start of the room, which is basically like a pool of water, and then the water's raining down on it. And I thought that meant like kind of a symbolism of like it cleanses away everything else to your deepest desire. So it doesn't let you basically choose what your desire is. It goes to the core of what your real desire is. So the example I think of the story in the movie is the guy who wants to bring his brother back to life, and he thinks that's his deepest desire, but really he goes in the room, goes back home, and realizes he becomes rich, and then he kills himself because he thinks it's shitty that he's actually just a shitty person who wants to be rich and not save.
That's Porcupine. That's the other Stalker
Yeah.
they keep referring to.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically what they're saying is you don't get to choose what your wish is. It goes to your deepest darkest soul's desire, which for me that is more of a bigger question, where I think it's the biggest desire of humanity is to know, because of religion, right, and everything, we want to know why we're here, what is the meaning of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think if you go to humanity's deepest desire is that whole big question, which is why I think, whether they meant this on purpose or not in the metaphor of the movie, where then I was because when you watch the movie, the bomb kind of comes out of nowhere, that nuclear bomb.
The bomb that the professor's gonna allegedly use to destroy the room. Yeah.
He brings it there because he wants to destroy the room. Mankind can't, play God with this room thing anymore. That, like, I guess the movie also kind of explains that it came down in a meteor, like aliens brought it.
They don't specifically say, they theorize that it was a meteorite, but we don't get a definitive answer.
Book, Roadside Picnic, meaning the meteor and the aliens, they're just having a roadside picnic. That's where that comes from. And then it becomes this zone that's protected by the government because the government doesn't want just anybody going in there, which is funny. While we were watching the movie, you mentioned Chernobyl, right?
Like briefly,
Yeah, but
No,
you had no idea that this movie was actually connected to Chernobyl,
I
right?
didn't know there was.
Right, and it's weird because a lot of people connected to Chernobyl because of they say it predicted the whole idea of like a forbidden zone.
And a lot of people involved in the production did end up getting sick and unfortunately passing away.
Well, right, that was because of like a paper factory nearby their shooting that was putting pollution in the water. And one of the shots in the final movie that was from actually the footage that they couldn't salvage. Some of those shots actually did make it into the movie, like the destroyed version.
Of the pollution that was in the water from
Yeah,
the
like
paper
the red
factory.
foam. Yeah, there's a red foam on the water shot that they put in the movie.
Okay.
Stuff like that. But yeah, and it's weird because that's kind of seen as like the Stalker curse, the pollution that a lot of them had died from the same cancer. Like his wife Tarkovsky and like some other people in the movie, they died from cancer because they think because they were wading in water that had pollution in it. And they even have a shot in the movie where they're the black oil mixed
Right.
with the water.
That's what I was initially thinking of when you brought up the pollution.
The whole idea of like whenever you make something forbidden, it just makes people more interested in it, like an Area 51 kind of thing. And I think it kind of parallels with things like Chernobyl and Area 51. Because first of all, Chernobyl, they the guides that bring you into Chernobyl, whether it's legal or illegal, I don't know, but they call them stalkers. Because I think it's
Oh, do they really?
on the movie. Yeah, I read that where they kind of the real life people stupidly trying to get close to the Chernobyl thing.
But listen to this, because I think Chernobyl actually mirrors Stalker in a kind of optimistic way, even though we've just been talking about the negative in the last couple minutes.
Yeah.
Because have you seen Our Planet, the David Attenborough document? Same guy who did Planet Earth. He did Our Planet on Netflix. Well, he does one about Chernobyl, and a lot of the theme of the series is like Planet Earth. It's just lots of beautiful nature shots, but it is about humans' impact on the planet. But he actually uses Chernobyl as a positive example because he's like, even though the radiation, discouraged any humans from inhabiting the area for almost a generation, the wildlife in the area bounced back way quicker than we would have expected. He's like, in less than 30 years, he's like, the wildlife is flourishing in Chernobyl. And we've heard that with like the Chernobyl wolves and like wild animals that have like grown to like huge sizes, but they're flourishing. And I feel like that kind of plays into Stalker as well, where it's this potentially, really shitty sort of landscape that's potentially really dangerous. But at the end, the Stalker goes there because I don't want to say it gives him faith in humanity because that's like a real oversimplification. But we know towards the end of the movie, he starts to break down when they threaten destroying the final room that shows people their desires. And you kind of have this sense that a lot of some of his being has to do with taking people there and all the hope that the room has to show people. And I feel like Chernobyl's kind of the same way. We think of it as this really toxic example of just like mankind fucking up with nuclear energy. But the reality is, after we kind of like backed off and mankind went away, other stuff was sort of flourishing.
Yeah.
Am I just being like too much of an optimistic fucking bearded hippie asshole with that one?
Yeah, like we said, we're just two honkies feeling bad about being white males. No.
It is a white male thing to say. All right.
No, because just some background in case, it's not just our friends and family watching this. Me and Greg are, we met as comedians in New York City, and we're bleeding heart liberals, and we have named the podcast because a lot of the social issues going on right now, and we're just making fun of that whole thing. But anyway, so yeah, it's interesting, right? And that's another thing with the coronavirus is that it stopped
nature is kind of like
because of our
been
quarantine.
restored in a lot of ways because we haven't been actively fucking everything up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, it's just interesting that like they predicted that whole idea of like a forbidden zone in like a science fiction way. But and it's funny because he doesn't like his movie Solaris because it's a more conventional science fiction film. That's why, and it doesn't kind of completely go with his philosophical technique of just kind of like the slow cinema being more truthful, even though that movie is
It
slow.
is slow.
Yeah, it's still
I
actually.
can see how like even with the slowness though, Solaris is kind of like structured more like a Hollywood movie with like because it's like his wife or his like girlfriend, the
Yeah,
object of his desire is kind of like rebirth through the idea of memory. And even though it is like, you know, very like contemplative and slow, it still has like a protagonist who has like kind of a typical goal that gives it a little more forward momentum, more in line with like American filmmaking than something like Stalker.
him having the brothers write the screenplay along with him, he was trying to strip away all the science fiction elements. Because really, on the surface, when you watch this movie, it doesn't actually seem like that. The cone, the the thermos like nuclear bomb is like the only like scientific
And even that's like very mundane.
of the
Looks
movie.
like a worker's thermos, like
Yeah,
very like working man's. It's interesting that I feel like the only imagery in the movie that feels kind of like a conventional science fiction movie is before they get in the zone when it's like the sepia tone
yeah.
with them on the cart and it's a lot of like broken down lights and barbed wire. It looks normally like industrial, but combined with the sepia tone, those are the only shots in the movie that if you saw out of context kind of look like science fiction-y.
Yeah,
In fact, like the remastered trailer is a lot of shots from that opening section of the movie because that's probably the ones that look the most exciting for people who aren't into art movies and shit.
yeah, where basically the guards are just shooting at them for going
Yeah.
in, and then it looks like some kind of truck with like electric, those electric, I don't know, insulators or something,
Yeah, yeah.
and they're just shooting at those. Yeah, and that's it. And what's also funny about that chase scene is that it seems to not really make any sense, like the ins and outs of that chase scene, which I think is him kind of making fun of, because he doesn't like conventional commercial cinema. So with his chase
I
scene,
feel like how slow they're originally moving on the trolley cart is definitely like a weird dig at like Hollywood chase scenes. Like, okay, this is the tension, but they're going really slow.
well, yeah, but even the chase scene before that in the car and everything, like that whole chasing doesn't seem to make any sense, and I think he kind of is saying like it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to make sense. That's not the point. The point
Hmm.
is that they're just getting away from the government and they have to sneak into the zone because it's forbidden, and that's all you really need to know. And the logistics and shots of the chase scene doesn't have to make sense. You get the basic plot of that story anyway. It's a very simple story. And
Yes.
so basically I think he's telling the very simple story because of it it fits in his philosophical storytelling of like, slow continuous shots are more truthful, and that he really just he seems like a philosopher trapped in wanting to be a filmmaker, I guess you could say, which is what a lot of art film directors, art cinema directors, like the auteur directors, kind of seem to be like these. Like it's like they really want to be philosophers, but they actually do want to, reach a broader audience. So even though within the context of cinema, they are not reaching a big audience as a big blockbuster, but as philosophers, instead of
They're
writing,
reaching more people than they would had they written like a
yeah,
several volumes book. Yeah.
yeah, if they were writer philosophers, that would be an even smaller audience than an art house. In terms of the philosophers they want to be, they are actually getting a bigger audience than a regular writer philosopher. And that's why they are always fighting with studios about the making of their films, because studios just want to make money. And so there's the confusion of like the commerce
I
and art.
think that's a little broad to throw all the auteur directors into that camp, but I see what you're saying.
I mean, it's true. There are auteurs who have made very successful movies, but I also think in general their movies are successful over time and become cult movies, and they're kind of misunderstood when they're released. But anyway,
do you think this movie is critical of atheism?
I think it is, because
I feel like it is too, but it's not like overtly.
I don't think he's being like religious, but he's definitely saying there's something bigger out there that has to do with the creation of us. We might not be able to explain it, but just atheism is kind of like just as flawed as an organized religion, because it's believing in the absolute of something that you don't really know about. So atheism, like, that's why I say I'm agnostic, because agnostic,
I think a lot of us do. Do you feel like, this is just a separate tangent, but I feel like, when I was in high school and like Richard Dawkins wrote like The God Delusion, there was like an influx of like new atheists. But I feel like the new atheism movement has almost like kind of fizzled out. Partially, I don't know if it's because like people are more open to like meditation, spirituality, but also I think like the new atheism movement kind of got tied in with like Islamophobia, because like Sam Harris is like really critical of like Islam, but particularly like was really supportive of like, the war in Iraq and shit. And so was like Christopher Hitchens. So I feel like the new atheism movement has kind of died down, but that's a separate thing. And I feel like the movie is kind of in flux with where a lot of us are spiritually right now, where most of us, I think, are agnostic. And I think a ton of people now would identify as being spiritual, but still not a ton of us who are religious. So I feel like the movie really was ahead of its time in a way a lot of science fiction movies aren't, because a lot of them are, when you say it's ahead of their time, they like had predicted technology, or in a depressing way with like George Orwell stuff, that they anticipated like just a shitty, like overbearing government. But this one I think was actually pretty telling in the way our approach towards being like atheists versus agnostics or theists or whatever, and us being in a kind of gray area right now.
I think, it probably explains why the movie is becoming more of a cult classic than his other movies, because like a lot of things that are ahead of their time, they don't get popular until the rest of the collective conscious has caught up with the ideas of that work of art, whatever it is.
And what was interesting is what I've been reading was one of my favorite authors is Kurt Vonnegut, and his take on I'm reading Timequake, which is not one of his best books. It's kind of like it's a bunch of excerpts from novels that he didn't finish, but it has a lot of his like musings about life because he was getting older. And I feel like Vonnegut's take on like faith and being religious is actually pretty similar to Tarkovsky's, even though I think Tarkovsky was like actually a Christian, right?
I actually don't know. I'm just going with like what just general things that I've read. I actually don't know.
Anyway, like Vonnegut doesn't seem like convinced by any actual theology, like any of the like Bible stories. He totally seems like secular, like he's interested in science and not won over by any of that. But he has like a very like commonplace appreciation for religion. Like in one like paragraph, he just like muses about how he appreciates when people say God bless you, and that he hopes and that he feels like he takes comfort in the idea that people say they hope you're in heaven after you're dead, even if he doesn't potentially believe in heaven. Like he has a lot of musings where he feels like there's benefits to sort of the like more like humanist aspects of religion. And I feel like it's very similar to Tarkovsky's in this film.
Right, where it's like they appreciate spirituality and religion even though they don't necessarily trust in believing it absolutely.
And I think because I think it's telling that I think the best sequence in the film is there's the narration that's from the Book of Revelation, which
Yeah.
you would think any filmmaker using the Book of Revelation, which is traditionally used for like fire and brimstone type speeches from religious institutions. That's like, you're gonna go to hell if you're fucking guys in the ass or whatever. You don't want to be doing that when the world ends. And
Yeah.
Tarkovsky uses that in a very unconventional way, because normally like end time stuff is used by like Baptists and other stupid denominations here in America, but he uses it like right when the artist guy is musing about the about how temporary art is and how even the great works of art are going to fade away. And instead of using it as like an end times thing, he's using it in a way where it kind of signals a waking up, an enlightenment, versus like an end of the world type thing. Because you remember it's where they're all like starting to fall asleep and the writer is like nodding off, talking about how he doesn't like care who reads his books. But as it goes on, it's evident that the writer is concerned about who reads his books and that he does kind of want something that's going to last, because we get a sense the whole time that he is only going to the zone because he's looking for that burst of inspiration.
No, yeah. It makes sense because there's so many sectors of Christianity because everybody is interpreting the Bible differently. And right, that's just like a more optimistic way to interpret the passage he used.
Right.
And yeah, and that's another thing. So when I was talking about the bomb, like so I was reading how like actually the professor brings the bomb so that
he does bring it, because we got confused about that when we watched it. I think
yeah,
he has the
I
bomb
don't know where the bomb came from. Like they just found it there or something.
I feel like maybe he does bring it with him because they make a whole thing about him wanting to go get his bag back. Remember?
Yeah, no, and I read it. Right, that's probably why, because I was reading how he brings the bomb because he wants to destroy the room so that other people can't use it, because it's kind of like the argument of like, man playing God, which I thought it, like the metaphor I was talking about, whether they meant it or not, I thought it was cool how that's basically how things go whenever we're trying to play God as man. There's always the argument, well, what should we be doing this, right?
Well,
And
again, do you feel like there's a parallel with like the Soviet Union in that respect? Because whenever people talk about like the issues with modern religion, they're usually talking about how religion was used to like provoke atrocities or whatever. And I feel like the professor's idea is kind of like, oh, if we just get rid of religion, we just get rid of the hope, it's going to make all the atrocities go away. But in this modern era, we kind of know that's not true, even though religion has been used to justify a lot of shitty things, as a gay man who grew up in a Mormon family. But I don't think it's completely true to say that religion is solely responsible for all the big disasters of the 20th century, because obviously the Soviet Union and other communist institutions killed a lot of people suppressing religion. So do you think there's some parallel with the professor or the academic's motives with wanting to destroy the room that is a symbol of hope and definitely has like this religious weight for the Stalker? Do you think there's some parallel there? Again, it's a lot to unpack. I'm sorry I threw all that at you. And I'm sorry I outed you as being a gay man raised by Mormons.
no, that makes sense. But I was thinking it more in how like, like when people go to Area 51, how they just want answers, right? They think whatever answers it could maybe answer them, then they could maybe I don't know, feel better about life and where we are and our purpose, right, and all that kind of thing. So or even when they go to Chernobyl, like maybe there's some answers in there, right, or whatever. So for me, the room, they're just representing, in terms of our greatest desires, they're just representing what people want to know or what they want or
what do you think you would see had you gone into the room?
Right. I don't think it was a visual thing, which is why they didn't really show it and they just showed the water. Right. That's not the point. And I think even the reason why they didn't even go in, or they didn't show them going in, was another like anticlimactic thing where, right, that's not the point. Or the point is they were so fearful of what they wanted, because that's another thing where they get so, when they're getting closer and closer to the zone, they start having arguments, because I think as you get closer to that truth that is the room, they started not having a filter, right? So it's kind of like actual nuclear pollution, right? Where the closer you get to it, the more it cancer and everything. So what, as they're getting closer to the room, they have no filter and keep having all these arguments and telling their truths, and to the point where it's kind of funny where the phone randomly rings and they're like, we can't talk now or whatever. Like they're like, it's not who you want or whatever. To like, I don't know, they were doing like some comedy
Yeah,
or something. And then another
it
comedian.
was at that point, like little like snippets of this movie. You compared it to a Beckett play.
Yeah,
I haven't actually read enough Beckett to make a
overall,
comparison, but it does feel like kind of
over
like
the top
absurdist
humor.
in a couple guys just lost and just reacting to things that are going on around them, like in the moment.
Yeah, and so as they get closer, they have no filter and keep arguing, to the point where like he's like pouring, the stalker's like pouring out his soul about like, I go on these missions because it's all my life is worth, and it's my happiness and my everything, whatever. And then the guy just responds to him like, I don't know, yeah, whatever. like like after that whole like speech, the guy just kind of brushes him off. It's kind of funny. But also I think the overall point of it is that like the metaphor of him wanting to destroy it with the bomb is the argument, like let's say you take eugenics, right? Eugenics, man is trying to be God, and
Oh,
like,
get into that. All right.
well, or that's one example of man trying to be God, but like there's a lot of examples where there's always the argument that we shouldn't play God, and that should be left alone. And I think that's where the bomb comes in, where he's,
I
what I
think so.
mean? The bomb is the metaphor of the argument of, should we really be fucking with that shit and playing God? But
Yeah.
then the argument could be, maybe people should play God and then learn the lesson. This is the fucked up shit that comes, like the Nazis and eugenics, like they learn the lesson, right? Or any case in terms of all that shit. I think man is supposed to try to play God and then learn the lesson of, oh shit, I'm flying too close to the sun, getting burned, whatever the metaphor, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's another, philosophical argument they're having in the movie with that whole thing. What do you think?
I mean, it's a big jump talking about eugenics, but I actually don't
That's
think you
one
were.
example of.
No, no, because I don't. I was gonna say I actually wasn't being a dick. I don't think you're
Oh,
completely off base because I feel like so many of the ideas we have about playing God and like man overstepping their bounds, they are like very almost kind of like from the Industrial Revolution on, but I almost want to say post World War II things because like the atomic bomb was such a defining thing for the 20th century, and I feel like a lot of our ideas of playing God are like post-nuclear ones, and obviously Russia was at the forefront of that with the Soviet Union and the Cold War and all that. So I feel like you're not completely off base that the academics response to it is I need to destroy
yeah.
this idea of playing God is inherently
Metaphor. The whole
yeah,
the whole simple
yeah,
story is a metaphor for right, like a post-nuclear world,
yeah.
which is so funny that people think it prophesized Chernobyl, right? It's so,
It's really interesting.
yeah.
And
Well, and then the fact that they died of some cancer in the pollution of the water nearby the film shooting, and they died, a lot of them probably died from it. That's a whole nother layer of like life imitating art, imitating life, imitating art,
yeah, absolutely.
he's not creating, even though this story seems so simple and science fiction-y and all that kind of thing, it's not, he's not creating in a vacuum. He's still creating it in the context of the problems man is going through, which is, I think, why people love the movie, even though they have to have the patience to appreciate it.
Let's talk about the ending.
Right, and that's why I think they didn't show it, but the stalker, I think, goes into the room, or at some point has gone into the room, because I'm probably guessing that his deepest desire was so his daughter has a better life, and that's what gives his daughter that telekinetic power that she shows in the movie, because I think that's him at some point going into the room and wishing her a better life of some kind.
I think that's the optimistic way of looking at it. Obviously, the less optimistic one is that it's just a train going by. But
what do you mean train going by? What do you mean?
Because that it's just the train that's shaking the glass, and she doesn't actually have telekinetic powers.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't even think of that. You're saying some people might just argue that it's the train?
Yeah. Because we get the sense it does a really good job of painting a gray area. We know, obviously, the stalker is very concerned about his daughter because she's been given a kind of like raw deal with her legs not working. And we know that he takes, I wouldn't say pleasure, but he finds meaning in life bringing people there. And it seems like he's in the idea of wanting to like have faith in something based on the reverence that he has for going inside the room. But he also says he's never actually gone inside.
Right. This is
so you get the sense that if Monkey, that's the daughter's name, does have telekinetic powers, it's actually that he's not wrong to have faith, but you also get the sense that the zone doesn't always behave in the way that you anticipate. Yeah. And that it's like, oh, it is giving him this advantage where like Monkey's given this leg up on being disabled because she has telekinetic powers, but you also get the sense that probably wasn't specifically what he was asking for. But it is this mysterious thing, this miracle of God or the big electron or whatever you want to call it, that is something that's happening that they don't quite understand, but in a sense is a response to his prayers.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't even think about that with the train. So I'm thinking that, well, I forgot what I was going to say in response to that, because I was trying to listen to you instead of be in my head.
This is what you said was going to happen. You're like, oh,
it still didn't work. It still didn't work.
You could have interrupted me.
But no, basically, I think, it's like the end of Inception with the coin.
I was going to say, do you think, I don't feel like I've heard Nolan mention Tarkovsky as an influence. I might just be.
No, yeah, I know that. I read Jonathan Nolan is a Tarkovsky.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was even going to say, like, I've heard people. I'm not a big Nolan fan, but I've heard people like complain about like Nolan's editing. How even though he makes a lot of like big movies with like big sequences, the way he cuts can be like kind of disorienting. But I've also heard people argue that it's intentional. And
right,
which maybe I don't know, but with Tarkovsky, I definitely feel like there's a lot of that in Stalker as well, because going back to just like what the long scenes and the long takes, how those impact the viewer that's watching, I also mentioned there's not a lot of traditional like coverage in the movie. He'll kind of like start somewhere and then he'll move in, and it gets you to the point where you're thinking, all right, where's the camera going to go next? And then when it does cut, you're thinking of it as another separate individual composition versus as a relation to where the previous shot was. So it gives the zone kind of this disorienting feeling where it's still grounded in reality, but you're very subtly kind of not having sense of where you are. And I know like we had that reaction when we were watching because we're like,
yeah,
oh fuck. I'm like, are they getting closer to the house? Like I feel like they should be closer. I'm like, oh, they're still in this area.
Yeah, I think,
but it's done in a very almost surreal kind of way.
Yeah, and I think it's because people are used to seeing the camera from a character's point of view when this camera is not from any of the characters' point of view. They say some of the film essays I was reading and watching were saying that it's basically the camera is the point of view of the zone itself. Like the zone is
Oh, that's cool.
so it's basically like the zone is watching them and kind of like changing it to their expectations or whatever. You know, kind of why he's saying like be careful, watch out, you know, because
Which
the zone is watching them.
the
But
big parallel I had that I don't know why no one's written about it from this context, but it did remind me of like a psychedelic trip in the sense of like time is sort of distorted. You want to be careful about what your desires are and what you're actually putting out there because it's gonna adapt and it's gonna work based off of that.
well, and it makes sense because you bought edibles from my sister before.
Not in the same, but
No, I know,
yeah,
but it's just
it
funny
does.
because you bought edibles from my sister and you were high during the second half of the movie.
During the first half. I took them before the movie.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, you were high the whole time. Okay.
And also just the fact that it's a day trip. I'm like, oh, I thought they were gonna be there for a while. I'm like, no, it's like an LSD trip where you go and do that, and you're like, all right, I guess I'm done for the day.
Yeah, that's what I thought was funny is like it's this big whole deal that they're doing this and that you think they're going to be like trapped out there forever. But like it doesn't show like well cuz also it's a movie, right? They can't show the logistics of how the fuck did they get back home without getting shot.
Yeah.
You know? But that's not the point, right?
Yeah.
'Cause it's a movie and it has other questions. It in a movie's contrived conceit, it's trying to answer some questions while avoiding some of the logistics of the story because that's the way most movies work. Which I think this movie kind of links in with the type of movies like Charlie Kaufman with like Being John Malkovich and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where I think the best movies and sometimes with James Cameron, like with Aliens or some of his movies like Abyss, and just a lot of good movies. What they do is they base it in reality, but there's only one element of the storytelling that is, you know, fantastical, right? So like Being John Malkovich, it's
Where it's still like
another
generally
person.
grounded in reality. Yeah, because I was thinking of Terrence Malick because
Yeah,
a lot of the Tarkovsky stuff is filmed in a conventionally very beautiful way, but a lot of the most beautiful shots in the movie are still shots of just like a bunch of industrial crap and like basically garbage floating in the water where you're like, oh, this is conventionally very beautiful, but at the end this is a product, possibly a product of a society that's broken down, maybe like due to a meteor or whatever, we never find out.
yeah,
He's more like he has a way of like shooting kind of like the ugliness or like the fallout of a
yeah,
society that's more or less crumbled in a way that's kind of hopeful. And I feel like that kind
yeah,
of surrounds the aura of the whole room. They're going through these like dirty pipes with like mold and
yeah.
shit
Meat
and all
grind.
this dirty, yeah.
Yeah, right. And it's kind of like another allegory of life where it's like it's shitty and beautiful at the same time.
Well, yeah, because the Book of Revelation stuff I was talking about before, the voiceover that happens while the writer is musing about life and stuff, it all happens over voicing over just this long sequence of just the shit floating in the water and a lot of broken tiles and et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, basically with the zone, right? So the zone also is a metaphor for like what, like, right? Like, I think humanity's like deepest desire is to know like where we came from, right? Like the big question of life that like religion is trying to answer and everything. And so it's kind of like it's a metaphor for like religion and all the big, you know, life questions people are trying to get answered, which is why I think people are so afraid of the room and why a lot of people have killed themselves who go in there, because it's also a metaphor for the only way we can really answer these questions is to die. And so I think maybe that's
Oh, okay.
people. I mean, maybe if this is what the writers are trying to, I don't know if this is what they intended, but for me, it's a genius allegory in terms of it makes sense that they would die because that's the only way you're going to get your questions answered.
You think they were dying because wanted like more fulfillment than what they got from the room.
Right. Maybe that's the result of wanting to know their deepest and desire is dying. The only way to know is to die.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to give you life's ultimate answers. And I think it's just like a collective energy of the universe, and the whole universe is one thing that is bored, and so it creates vessels like us to vicariously live a more interesting existence, not knowing anything. You might not realize that unless you've done acid.
Have you?
I want to do acid. I've only done THC. So
we can do it. I don't want you to freak out.
I definitely want to do acid.
All right, cool.
Or like DMT or something, right?
Yeah.
Is that what acid is DMT, or not necessarily?
No, I think they're a little different. DMT is more like a really pure, like, I think it's like psilocybin or
like,
something.
It's like nature's LSD, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think I definitely want to try some of that, because it's interesting how like all these ancient societies kind of knew that that was like a important resource to like expand the mind, and which could explain, you know, all these crazy things like the pyramids and monolithic structures that we can't explain, because they somehow knew something about the world, you know, with like burning their crops and stuff. and
yeah,
and like making the soil how they like they knew something to the point where
they were in touch with something that we have fucked up.
they obviously were somehow advanced in a way. And it makes sense, because we're what, like modern humans are only like 5,000 years old or something, where they could have been some kind of creatures or humans that were like 15,000 years old, to the point where, yeah, they found out some advanced shit because they had that time to evolve, but then they were wiped out by a meteor, and now we have to start over.
You know? Oh, fuck. It's a whole nother topic. I think that's
like, who knows what the
a good place to leave it.
Yeah, it's like, who knows what happened, right? It's kind of like Tarkovsky as a person growing up in a atheist government, you know, or atheist required government.
Atheist, yeah. Before we wrap up, I think we should talk about one sequence that I really like, that I feel like doesn't actually get written about as much, even though it was like the most jarring sequence for me, is when the Stalker's wife starts addressing the camera towards the end.
You can talk about that after I just finish my one point.
All right, finish your.
I think it's interesting that this film makes sense as, you know, Tarkovsky, somebody living under an atheist-ruled country, where he would want to rebel and want to think about, right? Because it's like the forbidden zone, right? So it's forbidden, and it's so interesting that this is the movie that where he exiled himself out of the Soviet Union after his next movie he had frustrations with. It's kind of like he's exiling himself out of the oppressed place in the sepia tone, right, into the color of the forbidden zone, which is like, you know, Italy, where he went, or Sweden, where he made his other movies. That's giving him more answers. He's rebelling against the atheism and just he thinks life is something more. He wants to think life is something more, because that's forbidden. And that's how humans work, is we're interested in the forbidden. So it's funny, I would like to think I'd probably do the same thing, but I'm in a Christian required society, and I rebelled and went the other way. And yeah, there's that whole thing. So what about his wife's monologue?
He pretty much addresses the camera directly. Like, it's pretty jarring.
Yeah. And it had nothing to do with the book.
What's up?
It had nothing to do with the book.
Oh, it's not in there?
Yeah, they invented it for the movie, yeah.
Because I feel like they structure it almost like she's talking to herself, but the way it's set up is that she's looking at the camera, and I feel like it's almost kind of similar to what happens to the daughter, where we're like, wait, are we supposed to assume she's talking to us, that she's breaking the fourth wall, that maybe she has some other knowledge the Stalker doesn't have? Or is this just her soliloquy and the camera just happens to be there? Because I feel like in a way that scene is set up, it's also like another like not a gray area, not like a what it, just a sort of like cliffhanger. Like, what are we supposed to assume about this scene? Is she talking to us, or does the camera just happen to be here? Because I feel like it's playing into the idea of like us kind of like taking what we want to take from it.
Yeah, well, I like to hope that it's Tarkovsky giving the female character more screen time because
Well, it was originally supposed to be played by his wife, but he wouldn't give her the part, right?
right, his wife was being like really diva-ish about it, and
Oh,
yeah,
one of
she was
those.
being a diva. She had the nickname of the Empress
Oh, I didn't know that.
because she even bossed him around and everything. But anyway, so but I'm hoping because like at the beginning she kind of goes crazy and it kind of just seems sexist, like, oh, like the woman of course is going to be hysterical,
And you see one of her
rinsing on the
nipples.
ground.
It's yeah.
Like I don't know, for me it's kind of sexist, and plus it proved my point when I watched a Tarkovsky documentary last night where he's and this woman is interviewing him for this documentary. It's the cinema, a time and place in cinema or something, like it's Tarkovsky, a time and cinema, something like that. And basically he's confused on why people want women to be equal and why can't women just be.
Oh,
Yeah, it's really like a man of his time, like being kind of like John Huston is like, they're these creative great artists, but they have their limits within the time they exist.
I mean, I think a lot of like Europeans at the time equated women being equal with like, oh, you want women to do work and stuff. He's like, no, the women like, it was like a both
Right, he
sides of the
could be
coin
mean
type
as
of thing.
well.
He's like, oh, but it's actually easier for them to not have to work. Like it's better.
Yeah.
Like they weren't being like outright hateful, but it was still like very limited and very not thinking of women as human beings, because it's not like, oh, they want to have a choice to do whatever they want to do. He's just like, oh, but just being the lady who takes care of the house is probably easier, and they get to have men fun after them and whatever.
Yeah, and it actually makes sense from an artist who you'd think would be liberal, even though they live in conservative times. It makes sense that they would just want to sound like well-meaning to women. It's like, oh, what's wrong with women's roles? Like, yeah, it's easy. Yeah, it makes sense as their argument in terms of the time they're living in, but versus you'd think they would be liberal. Yeah, it's interesting. It is weird. Like every movie I watch now, especially older movies, you see all like the Me Too moments, right?
I wouldn't go that, but yeah, I get it.
No, but you do. You see it through a different lens that you didn't even see it through before 2017, right?
Is there a
Since
movie in
2017,
particular that makes you think of that?
yeah, since 2017, I'm even more conscious. Well, I would always think about that stuff even before, but now it's even magnified even more after Me Too. Do you know what I mean? Right.
I think we need
Noticed
to
all
get
that
like
stuff as a liberal person. I noticed it all before, but after 2017, it was like even more jarring how horrible people used to be.
do you we should just have Nick DiPaolo on the next podcast and have him talk. I watched one. I didn't watch his his YouTube special, but I just clicked to a random point at the YouTube special. I'm like, let me just click to a random point and see what he
Right.
says.
Yeah.
And immediately he's like, yeah, the Me Too movement. He was like, yeah, these lesbians. How about that? I'm like, oh my, this fucking guy.
Yeah, it's funny
Like
how.
as a comedian, like I let it. I mean, he's trying to make jokes. I can let it slide, but it's just like exactly the shit you would expect from him. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna click on this, and he's gonna be like, Cosby's innocent. These fucking sluts. And I'm Italian. I'm like, this fucking guy.
No, yeah, it's weird. I saw some of his Joe Rogan interview, and they're like just complaining about being successful. I don't know. It was weird.
Yeah.
But so I guess maybe that's like a good place to end it. I think we kind of covered everything.
Fuck Nick DiPaolo.
I think we kind of covered everything that the movie's about, right? Like, can you think of anything you wanted to say?
No, I think we did a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty much we covered all the points I had.
Well, I didn't have any points because that wasn't part of the job.
Well, I mean, whatever.
All right, this is two honkies signing off.
Yeah, two honkies just feeling bad about being white males. And Greg feels even more bad because he's straight.
Because I'm straight.
I'm gay, so I at least have a little bit of a saving grace. All right.
All right, stop recording.
Everybody for listening. See you next time.